So this is night 3 of the Monday Night Pottery class, and we talked about throwing the neck and the bottle or the body all as one piece. We talked about how to alter the top, whether you're going to have a nice skinny neck or flared neck or some other style, and then making the shoulder and determining exactly where the widest portion of the piece is and how that affects the glaze flow. But I also talked about trimming, so I'm going to demonstrate trimming on this piece. And I've got a dry chuck here. I normally like a wet chuck, but all my wet chucks are at the Art Center right now. So I'm going to set this in the chuck, and you can see this is a little wobbly. So what I'm going to do is kind of center the neck just by pushing it into shape or into place. We talked also about sometimes the body and the base and the neck are not exactly centered to one another, so you just center the part you're going to be trimming. And I'm going to be fine-tuning this neck. You can see there's a little fat spot there, and there's a little bump here on the shoulder, and then I'm going to talk about finishing the top of the spout or the neck. That's pretty good. I'm going to say a little bit more. Okay, so again, I have my tools laid out, just the ones that I want. We talked about using a finishing slip. I'll demonstrate that, but I'm going to use these metal ribs. They're flexible, and I can just kind of put them in. I don't know if you can see. You could see actually much better from my perspective right over here. So I'm trying to follow the contour of the neck all the way down the neck, and then get rid of that fat area and blend it into the stem here. So I'm working on that fat part, and you know, this is really fragile, so you want to be pretty gentle in the way that you push on this. You're just taking off a tiny bit of clay at a time. Okay, so you can see that's starting to look a little bit better, and there's some lines there that I want to get rid of, so just scrape those off. And a little bit of wobble isn't a terrible thing, because you know it's wobbling now, but when I turn the wheel off it stops wobbling. So this piece was thrown all in one piece. I didn't throw the neck first and then add it. Okay, so I don't worry about how narrow the opening is just yet, because I want to trim the neck and not worry about it being too fragile. So what I'll do once I get the neck the right shape, if you look inside, it's a little bit narrow, a little bit tall there. So what I'll do is I'll take a sponge in there and erode the clay out of the center just to make the neck more uniform in thickness. All right, so that takes care of the neck. Now I'm going to take care of the neck as it transitions to the shoulder. And then I'm going to go down to the flat part of the neck, or the shoulder, I'm sorry. So as I'm doing this, because this is a mixture of white stoneware and porcelain, I'm going to get a lot of markings. I don't know if you can see those lines there, but I'm going to show you how to get rid of those. First, I want to just really fine-tune this line here on the shoulder. And this is where it's really important to know where the clay is on the inside. Okay, so that is getting close. You really want to see it from this side. I don't know, maybe you can see better what's happening on that side.
Yeah, your hand is kind of...
So I'm just trying to repair this part of the shoulder and make sure it blends into the neck. And then around the shoulder. All right, so what we talked about is, once this is the shape I want, I'm going to take we've got our throwing slip, remember? Over here, if you just brush on a little bit of throwing slip, this is out of the same clay, and we were talking about how if I want to make sure it's perfectly smooth, I will take this through an 80 mesh or 100 mesh screen just to get rid of any kind of rocks or little chunks. And then you're just going to flatten your rib. See how flat that is on the surface? And just squeegee that. Now, it's kind of like adding a layer of terra sigillata, but it's just adding a layer of slip. And this helps to reduce the amount of sanding you'll need to do once the piece is bisque fired. If you can get this nice and smooth, you'll still have to sand a little bit, but not much. Okay, so you can see that is pretty darn good right there. All right, so now I'm going to talk about, usually when you're throwing this, our inclination is to want to try to chamois this, and you can certainly do that if the neck is strong enough, but I wait until it is bone dry or pretty darn close to that. And I'm just going to take this poly sponge and just kind of watch right here what happens as I lay that poly sponge very gently on the surface. It's going to just make that nice and perfect. So a little raggedy top is not a problem because you can always address it once you're trimming. So now I'm going to take a sponge and erode the inside, so that's going to be nice and uniform thickness there. And then one of the things we talked about is by putting that slip on here, it's very wet and very sticky. So you want to, before you turn it over on a chuck, make sure this is dry, and you don't want your hand to stick to the surface at all. Okay, so go ahead, feel it. There you go, see? It's nice and smooth, really, really smooth. All right, now I'm going to turn it over. Because I've dried this, this is not going to mar this surface. Now I'm going to center the bottom. And we were talking about how you can use a level to center this, and sometimes the level doesn't really work very well. So I just center it by turning the wheel, and it's touching on this side, so I want to tip it until it touches all the way around, nice and even. Okay, so now as we're talking about trimming this, I have another piece that I have an actual piece. But we were talking about, I can trim the bottom so that it's relatively round and then trim a recessed foot out of that. Or I can trim it so that I kind of reverse the line. So you see here, I could trim a little bit more away and then reverse that line. And what this does is it works with the glaze. In this example, the glaze would flow down and hit this and then build up where it hits the catch tray. Where on this one, the glaze would flow down and around that, and as it hits the foot where those two are attached, because they're pretty much vertical, it flows past the join and into the catch tray. See how this way it would build up and get too thick right there. So that's something to keep in mind when you're trimming a foot. So we're going to try to apply that to this piece. And I know I have a good amount of clay here, probably not so much clay there, so I'm going to establish the foot first. Try to introduce that change in direction so that the glaze will flow down nice and easy. And I like a relatively narrow foot. All right, so that is the foot. Now I have to blend this in, so I'm going to start up here. Just shave up a tiny bit. Try to continue that line all the way down to the foot. This is where it's really important to remember where you left the clay, and I know I left a lot of clay right here. Okay, so there's the bottom. I want to keep that vertical portion. Okay, so I'm not really sure how much clay I left here, so it's getting a little, I'm getting suspicious that it might be a little thin, so I'm going to stop and tap. And what I'm listening for is if it changes sound and it sounds like it's got a lot of clay there yet, so I'm going to allow myself to be a little more aggressive. It'll change into more of a high-pitched tap when it's too thin. Okay, so all right, so I've got the basic form, and I am going to use my flexible scraper again. And I'm going to, you can see that it just barely changes direction so that when this is attached to a riser, that glaze will flow down past the foot. Okay, I'm just using my flexible scraper to get rid of any trimming marks. Okay, so that looks nice and smooth. And I'm going to take my throwing slip and clean up that. We're talking about how when I'm trimming, and I'm not king of trimming, so I don't know the only way, but I like to trim the outside so that it's finished first, and then I can start removing clay from the inside. If I do the inside first, I might accidentally make the foot too wide, and I'm kind of rethinking this right here. Okay, good. Now I'll put some throwing slip on here. Notice I haven't trimmed out any in the inside of the foot yet. I'm trying to finish the outside. Okay. So that does a really good job of filling in. You can't see any trimming marks anymore. I'm going to go down here. And then once I get this tightened up, I can then start working on the recessed area of the foot. And you'll notice that the rib is almost completely flat on the surface. Kind of using it as a burnishing tool. And I'm not pushing really hard. I'm just kind of letting the rib drag on the surface. There we go. So that's done. Now I want to dry it so that as I'm trimming clay away from here, crumbs aren't sticking to the side. And as I was doing that, I noticed that this part here hasn't been burnished at all yet, so I'm going to finish burnishing this. It really makes a difference when, after it's bisque fired, you'd be surprised at how very little sanding you have to do if you take the time to burnish the surface. Okay. So now what I do when I'm trimming the foot, you might want to get a bird's eye view of this. I'm going to mark the diameter, this part of the foot, just by trimming down a little bit. And again, it helps to know how much clay you have in there, and I always try to have at least a ½ inch on the bottom. So I'm going to assume it's there. All right, so first I go down here, establish the foot, and then I'm going to go to the center and trim out to that groove, but not past the groove. There's the groove. And the reason is, we explained that this is really a blade in a triangle shape. And if I get this blade too close to the corner of the foot here, it will just take the tool right out of my hand and go that way. So I have to really be careful not to get this blade close to that. So I'm going to dig down a little deeper, go to the center and dig out a little more clay. And keep tapping, and it sounds like it's the right thickness. And so for me, I like to have this sharp line and this sharp line are clues to the eye. It draws attention to the foot, and it makes it look nice and perfect. So what I want to do is add one more line, and what I do is I keep pushing the trimming tool out until it undercuts the foot just a little bit. So you see the difference there? It's just got a nice voice right there, and that's definitely optional. It's one of the things I like to do. To me, it just gives it a nice clean look. All right, so the other question was, what if you're trimming a foot and it's thick over here and thin over there? And the answer is, if you can't correct it through trimming, what you can do is remove this sharp corner just by trimming this round, and then that line disappears.
It's not quite so noticeable.
It's not as noticeable, but you want a nice flat place for your riser, and then you want to definitely make sure you have that other crisp line on the inside, and that makes it look perfect. All right, so we're going to put that line back in because I like a nice square edge on there. And then I'll undercut it one more time. Okay, and then we were talking about signage. Some people like to use a stamp. I personally think a stamp makes it too cold and impersonal. So I like to sign it with my own signature and then date it. And some people don't like to date it either because they feel like if it didn't sell for like 2 years, it seems like a negative. But to me, it just shows at what time in your pottery making did you make this piece. I think it's important to know that. All right. I added some more slip because there was a little divot in there and I wanted to cover it up, and it looks like it's gone. All right, so we will see you next Monday at 5 o'clock. The class starts at 6. So between 5 and 6, you can take some time to finish up what you were working on the week before. And at 6 o'clock, I will do the next demonstration. And we'll start working on making some risers. That was the other thing we talked about, is as soon as you have this piece trimmed, you're going to want to put it on a piece of paper and take a pencil and trace around the bottom as close as you can. And you can save, those for a long period of time and throw 10 instead of 1 at a time. It just saves a lot more time for you. And so we'll see you next Monday.